Victoria Hale stepped out of Bergdorf Goodman expecting nothing more than another ordinary afternoon of luxury shopping in Manhattan. Then a scruffy homeless girl approached her and said 5 impossible words that made Victoria's blood run cold, her hand instinctively covering the diamond ring she'd worn for 8 years without question. What Victoria didn't know was that this chance encounter was about to unravel secrets buried for a century, expose a husband she never truly knew, and force her to choose between comfortable lies that protected her world and a dangerous truth that could destroy everything. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The afternoon sun glinted off the storefront windows of Madison Avenue, casting expensive reflections across polished marble and designer glass. Victoria Hale stepped out of Bergdorf Goodman, her heels clicking against the pavement with the confident rhythm of someone who belonged in this world of luxury. Her tailor-cream suit probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and the shopping bags dangling from her manicured fingers carried labels that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. She paused to adjust her sunglasses, the emerald-cut diamond ring on her finger catching the light. It was a beautiful piece, vintage, with a distinctive setting that drew compliments at every charity gala she attended. The stone itself seemed to hold stories within its facets, green fire trapped in crystal clarity. That's when the voice cut through the ambient noise of the city. "My mother has that ring." Victoria froze. The words hadn't been loud, but they carried a certainty that made her blood run cold. She turned slowly, expecting to find a confused tourist or perhaps someone playing a prank. Instead, she found herself staring down at a small black girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with eyes far too old for her face. The child was clearly homeless. Her clothes were clean enough, but worn thin, her sneakers held together with what looked like duct tape. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, but wisps had escaped, creating a halo of frizz around her face. Despite her obvious poverty, she stood with her shoulders squared, meeting Victoria's gaze without flinching. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice came out sharper than she intended. "That ring," the girl said, pointing directly at Victoria's hand. "My mother has one exactly like it." Around them, the flow of pedestrian traffic slowed. People turned to watch, their expressions shifting from curiosity to judgment in seconds. A security guard from the boutique took a step forward, his hand moving toward his radio. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was ridiculous. Some street child was trying to run a scam, and she was about to become part of the spectacle. She could already hear the whispers starting, see the phones being raised to capture the moment. "I don't know what you're trying to pull," Victoria said, her voice low and controlled, "but this ring is a family heirloom. Your mother most certainly does not have one like it." The girl didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to grow more determined. "It has words inside, engraved on the inside of the band." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The security guard was closer now, his presence looming. Other shoppers had formed a loose semicircle, their expensive bags and designer sunglasses creating a barrier between themselves and this uncomfortable moment. "She's running a scam," someone muttered. "They target people coming out of the expensive stores." "Probably stolen," another voice added, trying to claim it belongs to her family. The girl's jaw tightened at the accusations, but fear flickered across her face for the first time. Still, she didn't run. She looked up at Victoria with an intensity that felt almost desperate. "The words say truth endures," the girl said quietly. "In cursive letters. Small. You probably can't even see them unless you know they're there." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Victoria's fingers moved unconsciously to cover the ring, twisting it against her skin. How could this child possibly know that? She'd only discovered the engraving herself by accident, years ago, when she'd taken the ring off to wash her hands and caught the light at just the right angle. "Ma'am, is this child bothering you?" the security guard asked, his hand already reaching toward the girl's shoulder. Victoria held up her free hand, stopping him. "No, it's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. The girl was staring at her with a mixture of hope and terror, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest, some certainty she'd carried for years beginning to crack. "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Amara." "Amara, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't appropriate. This ring belonged to my late husband's family." The words came out automatically, the story she'd been told and had never questioned. "Whatever your mother told you is mistaken." Amara's face fell, but she didn't move. "She didn't tell me anything. I saw it. In a photograph. She hides it, but I found it. She was wearing that exact ring, and my grandmother was there too, and they looked happy." Her voice cracked slightly. Before everything got bad, the security guard moved forward again. "Come on, kid. Time to go." "Wait," Victoria heard herself say. She didn't know why. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was a manipulation, a con designed to prey on her emotions. But something in the girl's eyes held her frozen. "Please," Amara whispered. "I just wanted to know. I just wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "Why we have nothing when my mother came from something." Tears were gathering in the corner of the girl's eyes now, but she blinked them back furiously. Why she won't talk about before? Why she gets scared when I ask questions? Victoria's assistant, Daniel, appeared at her elbow. He'd been waiting in the car and must have noticed the commotion. His hand touched her arm gently, a question in his eyes. "Everything all right, Mrs. Hale?" "Yes," Victoria said automatically. Then, to Amara, "I'm sorry, but you need to go now." The girl's shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a child who'd taken a desperate chance and lost. She nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to become unseen. Victoria stood frozen on the sidewalk, her shopping bags suddenly feeling heavy. "What was that about?" Daniel asked carefully. "Nothing. Just a confused child." But even as she said it, Victoria was twisting the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of it differently than she had in years. "You look upset." "I'm fine, Daniel." The snap in her voice was unusual enough that he took a step back, his eyebrows raising slightly. Victoria never snapped at him. In the 5 years he'd worked as her assistant, she prided herself on maintaining perfect composure. "Of course. The car's ready whenever you are." Victoria nodded, but she couldn't seem to make her feet move. She was staring at the spot where Amara had vanished, replaying the conversation in her mind. How had the girl known about the engraving? It wasn't visible unless you removed the ring and looked closely. Was it possible she'd seen it somehow? Stolen a glance when Victoria hadn't been paying attention? But no, that made no sense. Victoria wore the ring constantly, had worn it for nearly 8 years since Richard died. She barely took it off except to sleep. "Mrs. Hale." Daniel's voice was gentle now, concerned. "Let's go," she said, forcing herself to move. The ride back to her penthouse was silent. Daniel knew better than to press when she was in this mood, so he occupied himself with his phone, sending emails and confirming her schedule for the week. Victoria stared out the window, watching the city blur past, but she wasn't really seeing it. Truth endures. She'd always found the phrase oddly ominous for an engagement ring. When she'd discovered it years ago, she'd asked Richard's mother about it, but the older woman had been vague, mentioning something about family tradition and values. Victoria had let it drop, assuming it was some Victorian-era sentiment about fidelity or honor. Now the words felt like an accusation. Across town, Amara pushed through the doors of St. Catherine's shelter, her shoulders hunched against the weight of failure. The main room was crowded with the usual afternoon chaos. People lined up for the dinner service that would start in an hour, others clustered around the television or sitting at tables playing cards. She found her mother in their assigned corner, a space barely large enough for 2 cots separated by a hanging sheet for privacy. Nia was lying down, her eyes closed, but Amara could tell she wasn't really sleeping. Her mother never really slept anymore, just closed her eyes and waited for time to pass. "Mama." Nia's eyes opened immediately, focusing on her daughter with the sharp awareness of someone always expecting bad news. "Where were you?" "Just walking." The lie came easily. Amara had learned early that some truths only made things harder. But Nia knew her too well. She sat up slowly, wincing slightly. The cough that had been plaguing her for months made every movement an effort. "What happened?" Nothing happened. Amara. Her mother's voice carried a warning. Don't lie to me. The words burst out before Amara could stop them. I saw her. The woman from the photograph. The one wearing grandmother's ring. The color drained from Nia's face. For a moment, she looked like she might faint, and Amara rushed forward, grabbing her mother's hand. Mama, I'm sorry. I just wanted to know. I wanted to understand. What did you say to her? Nia's voice was barely a whisper. I told her you had the ring, that I recognized it. Oh God. Nia pulled her hand away, pressing it against her mouth. Oh God, Amara, what have you done? I just wanted answers. You won't tell me anything. You want to talk about before, about grandmother, about why we're here, instead of what? Nia's voice was sharp now, edged with panic. Instead of living some fairy tale? There is no instead, baby. This is our life. This is what we have, and we survive by staying invisible, by not asking questions, by not drawing attention. But the ring, Mama. Grandmother is wearing it in the picture, and now that rich white lady has it. How does that happen? Nia was shaking her head, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow in a way that scared Amara. She recognized the signs of one of her mother's panic attacks, the ones that had become more frequent as her health declined. There are dangerous people connected to that ring, Nia managed to say between gasping breaths. People who want the past to stay buried. You can go around asking about it. You can't. What people? What past? But Nia was standing now, pacing in the tiny space despite her obvious weakness. Promise me you'll stay away from her. From that woman. Promise me, Amara. Mama. Promise me. Okay. Okay, I promise. Amara said the words, but she didn't mean them. Not really. Something about the way that woman, Victoria, had looked at her in those final moments. Something about the fear in her mother's eyes now told Amara that the ring was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to something, a door to truth that had been locked for too long. That evening, Victoria stood in her penthouse overlooking Central Park, a glass of wine in one hand. The dinner party she was hosting would begin in less than an hour. Caterers moved through her home with practiced efficiency, setting up stations of elegant hors d'oeuvres, arranging flowers, adjusting lighting. Daniel appeared beside her, holding a tablet. The Richardsons confirmed for 8 o'clock. The Vanderbilts are running 15 minutes late, usual story. And the foundation board members will all be here by 8:30. Thank you, Daniel. He hesitated. Are you sure you're feeling up to this? You seem distracted since this afternoon. I'm Fina. But she wasn't fine. She couldn't stop thinking about Amara's face, about the specific details the girl had known, about the fear in her voice when she'd mentioned her mother. Victoria turned away from the window and walked to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. She needed a moment alone, a moment to think clearly without Daniel's concerned gaze or the caterer's bustling presence. She stood in front of her vanity and slowly removed the ring, holding it up to the light. The emerald-cut diamond caught the glow from the setting sun, fracturing it into rainbow shards. She tilted it, angling the band until she could see the inner surface. There, exactly as Amara had described, were the words, "Truth endures." The engraving was tiny, delicate, the kind of detail that required a jeweler's eye to execute. Victoria had always assumed Richard had added it, a romantic gesture before proposing. But now, staring at the cursive script, she realized she'd never actually asked. She'd accepted the ring, accepted his proposal, accepted the story of family heirlooms without ever questioning the details. She thought back to those early days, to the whirlwind courtship that had swept her into Richard's world of old money and social prestige. They'd met at a charity function. She'd been working as an event coordinator, and he'd been one of the donors. Their romance had been fast, intense, and slightly overwhelming. His mother had given them the ring during a private dinner, pressing it into Richard's hand with tears in her eyes. Victoria had been moved by the gesture, by the idea of being welcomed into such an established family. The ring had felt like a symbol of belonging. But what if it had been something else entirely? What if the ring carried a history she'd never been told? Victoria picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number from Marcus Webb, the jeweler who'd resized the ring for her years ago when it had become loose. She'd chosen him because he specialized in antique pieces, understood their value and history. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Webb Jewelers. Marcus, it's Victoria Hale. Mrs. Hale, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you this evening? That ring you resized for me, the emerald-cut diamond. Do you still have records of the work? There was a pause. I'd have to check, but yes, I keep records of all significant pieces. Is there a problem? No problem. I just wondered if you could tell me anything about its origin. When you worked on it, did you notice anything unusual? Any indication of who might have originally owned it? Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Hale, when you brought that piece to me, I did note in my records that the original band showed signs of being quite old. The craftsmanship suggested it was made in the early 20th century, possibly 1920s. The resizing work had been done at least twice before I touched it, which indicated multiple owners or significant weight changes. Victoria's heart was beating faster now. Multiple owners? At minimum, yes. The engraving inside was original to the piece, not added later. That particular style of script was popular in the Art Deco period. And if I'm being completely honest, Mrs. Hale, the quality of the diamond and the setting suggested it was made for someone of considerable wealth. Old wealth, the kind that doesn't need to show off. Is there any way to trace the original owner? Not without more information, I'm afraid. If it came from a major jeweler, there might be records, but many pieces from that era were custom-made by craftsmen who didn't keep detailed archives. The records that do exist are scattered across estate sales, private collections, insurance claims. Victoria thanked him and ended the call, her mind racing. The ring was older than Richard's family, which meant the story about it being a Hale family heirloom was, at best, incomplete. At worst, it was a lie. A knock at her bedroom door made her jump. Mrs. Hale. Daniel's voice was muffled through the wood. The first guests have arrived. Victoria slipped the ring back on her finger, the metal feeling foreign now, waited with questions. I'll be right there. She checked her reflection in the mirror, smoothing her dress, touching up her lipstick. The woman staring back at her looked composed, elegant, untouchable. But underneath the polished exterior, something was shifting. The dinner party was exactly what it always was, a carefully choreographed performance of wealth and influence. Victoria moved through the rooms of her penthouse, smiling at the right moments, laughing at appropriate jokes, discussing foundation business with board members who cared more about tax write-offs than actual charity. But her mind was elsewhere. She kept seeing Amara's face, kept hearing the girl's voice. Why we have nothing when my mother came from something. During dessert, when the conversation turned to the foundation's latest initiative, Victoria found herself speaking almost without thinking. I've been considering expanding our scholarship program, she said, specifically targeting children from unstable housing situations. The table went quiet. Thomas Richardson, a board member who'd known Richard's father, set down his fork with deliberate slowness. That's quite a departure from our usual focus. Is it? Victoria met his gaze steadily. I thought our mission was supporting underprivileged youth. Supporting promising students, Thomas corrected. Children who demonstrate potential for success. Not simply throwing money at poverty. The words hit Victoria like a slap. She'd heard similar sentiments before, had perhaps even nodded along without really listening. But tonight, with Amara's face fresh in her mind, they sounded ugly. Potential exists everywhere, she said quietly. Perhaps we've been looking in the wrong places. The conversation moved on, but Victoria noticed Daniel watching her with curiosity. He'd worked with her long enough to recognize when something had shifted. Later, after the guests had departed and the caterers had cleaned up, Victoria stood alone in her living room. The city lights sparkled below, a constellation of windows where other people lived other lives. She wondered which of those windows might belong to the shelter where Amara and her mother were sleeping. The thought brought her up short. Why did she care? She dismissed hundreds of panhandlers, ignored countless sob stories, walked past homeless people without a second glance. Why was this different? Because the girl knew about the engraving. Because something about this felt true in a way Victoria couldn't explain. She pulled out her phone and texted Daniel. Even though it was nearly midnight, can you discreetly find out which shelter is closest to Madison Avenue and see if they have records of residents named Nia or Amara. No last name. The response came back within minutes. Of course. First thing tomorrow. Victoria walked to her bedroom, but she knew she wouldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, twisting the ring on her finger, feeling the shape of those hidden words. Truth endures. What truth? Whose truth? And why did she suddenly feel like everything she'd built her life on might be resting on a foundation of lies? The next morning, Daniel arrived with coffee and information. St. Catherine's Shelter on East 67th. They have a Nia Williams registered with a daughter named Amara, age 9. They've been there for about 7 months. Victoria's hands tightened around her coffee cup. 7 months. Should I reach out? Set up a meeting? No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Not yet. I need to think. But thinking was becoming dangerous. Because the more Victoria thought about it, the more questions emerged. She found herself digging through old boxes in her storage unit that afternoon, searching for anything from Richard's past that might offer clues. She found a photograph tucked into a financial ledger from a year before they married. Richard stood in front of the Hale Industries headquarters, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, slightly out of focus, was a young black woman. She was beautiful, her smile radiant, her hand resting on Richard's arm with casual familiarity. The woman looked happy. Richard looked happy. Victoria had never seen that particular expression on her late husband's face, that unguarded joy. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in Richard's handwriting, better days. Nothing else. No name, no date, no explanation. But Victoria knew, with a certainty that made her feel sick, that she was looking at Nia. Victoria stared at the photograph for 3 days before she found the courage to return to the shelter. The image haunted her, that unguarded happiness on Richard's face, the easy intimacy between him and the woman who had to be Nia. She'd memorized every detail, the way the sunlight caught in Nia's hair, the genuine warmth in her smile, the possessive way Richard's hand rested on her shoulder. Better days. What did that mean? Better than what? Better than their marriage? The thought made Victoria's stomach twist with a jealousy she had no right to feel for a dead man's past. Daniel had been watching her carefully all week, his concern growing more obvious each day. Finally, on Thursday morning, he set down her coffee and said quietly, "Whatever you're planning, Mrs. Hale, please let me help. I need to speak with Nia Williams. Alone. That's not safe. You don't know anything about this woman. I know she worked in our household." Victoria watched Daniel's eyebrows rise. "Before Richard and I married, I found a photograph." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "What are you hoping to accomplish?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "But I can't stop thinking about that girl. About the things she knew. About the fear in her mother's eyes when she mentioned the ring. She twisted it on her finger, the familiar gesture that had become almost obsessive. Something happened, Daniel. Something that connects all of this, and I need to understand what. And if the truth is ugly." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "Then at least it will be the truth." That afternoon, Victoria walked into St. Catherine's Shelter carrying bags from a local deli. She dressed down, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, though she knew the attempt at blending and was futile. Everything about her screamed wealth, from her haircut to her handbag. The shelter coordinator, a tired-looking woman named Marie, eyed her suspiciously. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Nia Williams. I'd like to speak with her. Are you family?" "No, but I have information that might help her situation." Marie's expression shifted to something harder. "We get a lot of people coming through here with promises. Most of them want something in return. What do you want?" "Just to talk. Nia's not well. She doesn't need stress. Please." Victoria heard the desperation in her own voice. "It's about her daughter. About Amara." Something in Marie's face softened slightly. "Wait here." Victoria stood in the crowded common room, acutely aware of the stares she was receiving. She clutched the deli bags tighter, feeling ridiculous. What had she been thinking? That she could just walk in here and demand answers? That this woman would welcome her with open arms? Then she saw her. Nia emerged from behind a partition, moving slowly, one hand pressed against her side, as if breathing hurt. She was thinner than she'd been in the photograph, her face drawn and exhausted, but Victoria recognized her immediately. For a moment, neither woman moved. They simply stared at each other across the shabby room, separated by more than just physical distance. Nia spoke first, her voice hoarse. "You shouldn't be here. I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about." But even as she said it, Nia's eyes went to the ring on Victoria's finger, and something crossed her face, grief so raw it was painful to witness. "Please," Victoria said. "Just a few minutes." Nia looked around the room, clearly aware of how many people were watching them. "Not here. Outside." They walked to a small park 2 blocks away, finding a bench away from the playground where other children were playing. Victoria set the deli bags between them, an awkward peace offering that Nia ignored. "Where did you find me?" Nia asked. "Your daughter found me first. 10 days ago, outside a boutique on Madison Avenue. She told me you had a ring like this one." Nia closed her eyes. "I told her to stay away from you. She knew about the engraving. The words inside the band. How could she possibly know that? I told you. There's nothing to discuss. That ring, that life, it's all in the past. It needs to stay there. But it's not in the past, is it?" Victoria's voice rose slightly. "Because you're here, living in a shelter with your daughter, and I'm living in a penthouse wearing a ring that apparently has a history I know nothing about." Nia turned to look at her directly for the first time, and Victoria was shocked by the intensity in her eyes. "You want to know the history? Fine. I work in your house. I was your caretaker before you even knew Richard existed. I cleaned your future home, arranged your future flowers, prepared meals for a family I would never be part of." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. "You work for Richard's family?" "For 2 years. I was young, needed the money, thought it would be temporary." Nia's laugh was bitter. "Nothing is ever temporary, though, is it? Nothing ever stays contained the way we think it will." "Did you and Richard?" Victoria couldn't finish the question. "Have an affair?" Nia's voice was sharp. "Is that what you're really asking? Whether I was sleeping with your husband while dusting his mother's antiques?" "I need to know." Nia was quiet for so long Victoria thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer, weighted with old pain. "It wasn't an affair. Not at first. Richard and I, we met before you. Before his family decided who he should marry. Before all the expectations and social climbing and arranged introductions at charity functions." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. "You loved him. He loved me." Nia's voice broke slightly. Or at least, he said he did. He said a lot of things that turned out to be easier to say than to actually do. The pieces were starting to fall into place now, a picture Victoria had never wanted to see. What happened? What always happens when people like us fall in love with people like you? Nia gestured between them, the gulf of race and class made visible. His family found out. His mother specifically. She made it very clear that Richard had responsibilities, a legacy to uphold, a certain type of woman he needed to marry. Someone from the right background, the right social circle, the right color. Victoria felt sick, and he chose them. He chose survival. He chose the company, the inheritance, the life he'd been raised to expect. Nia wiped at her eyes roughly. "I don't even blame him anymore. We were young. He was terrified of losing everything. I was just the help, someone who could be paid off and forgotten." Amada Victoria Guisperth. Nia's hand moved protectively to her chest, as if she could shield her daughter from the truth even now. "I found out I was pregnant a week after Richard ended things. A week after he told me he was dating someone new, someone appropriate, someone named Victoria." The world seemed to tilt. Victoria gripped the bench to steady herself. "Richard knew?" "No." Nia shook her head. "I never told him. What would have been the point? He'd already made his choice. All telling him would have done is destroy his new life, or worse. He might have tried to take her from me. Pay me off, arrange some quiet adoption, make the problem disappear the way his family made everything inconvenient disappear. So you just left?" "I disappeared, changed my name, moved across the city, took whatever work I could find while pregnant. It wasn't easy, but it was better than the alternative." Victoria was reeling, trying to process everything. In the ring, Nia's expression hardened. That ring was supposed to be mine. Richard bought it with money he'd saved before his family knew about us. He said it was proof that he was serious, that he'd find a way to make it work. She laughed bitterly. But when his mother found out, she confiscated it. Said a ring like that was too good for someone like me. She held on to it, and then, when Richard got engaged to you, she gave it to him to use as your engagement ring. The same ring he'd bought for me, recycled for someone more suitable. Victoria felt like she might be sick. She looked down at the ring on her finger, seeing it completely differently now. It wasn't a family heirloom at all. It was evidence of a love destroyed, a promise broken, a woman erased from the story. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Are you?" Nia's voice was sharp. "Sorry enough to give it back? Sorry enough to acknowledge that your entire marriage was built on top of someone else's heartbreak?" I didn't know. Richard never told me any of this. Of course he didn't. Men like Richard don't tell stories that make them look bad. They just move forward, assuming the past will stay buried. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelations pressing down on both of them. Finally, Victoria asked the question she'd been dreading. "Does Amara know? About Richard?" She knows she has a father who didn't want her. She doesn't know the details, doesn't know his name. I thought it was kinder that way. Nia's voice broke. She's already got enough to deal with being black, being poor, being invisible to people like you. I didn't want to add rejection by a rich white father to the list. "People like me," Victoria repeated quietly. "You don't even know me, don't I? You're exactly the woman Richard's mother wanted for him. Elegant, connected, white, socially appropriate. The kind of woman who fits into his world without causing problems." Nia stood up, swaying slightly. "I need to get back. Amara will be worried." "Wait." Victoria stood too. "Let me help. Medical care, housing, something. You're sick, anyone can see that. And Amara deserves better than a shelter. I don't want your guilt money." "It's not guilt money. It's—" Victoria struggled to find the right words. "It's acknowledgement of what was taken from you, of what my husband should have done. Your husband is dead. There's no making up for anything now. Maybe not, but Amara is alive. She's Richard's daughter, which means she's entitled to support from his estate. Legally, morally, every way that matters." Nia's expression turned fearful. "No, absolutely not. You can't tell anyone about this. You can't go public with it." "Why not?" "Because there are people who don't want this story getting out. Richard's family, the company board, all those respectable people who built their reputations on erasing inconvenient truths. They'll destroy us before they let some shelter kid claim a piece of the Hale fortune." "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" Nia leaned closer, her voice urgent. "Why do you think I've stayed hidden for 10 years? Why do you think I use a fake name and move shelters every few months? Richard's mother made it very clear what would happen if I ever try to contact him or make any claims. She has lawyers, private investigators, people who make problems disappear. And I'm just a problem." Victoria wanted to argue, to say that it couldn't possibly be that bad, but something in Nia's fear was too real to dismiss. "What did she threaten you with?" "Everything. Custody battles I couldn't afford to fight. Criminal charges for extortion if I ever asked for money. Deportation, even though I was born here. She claimed she could fabricate documentation to make it happen." Nia's breathing was becoming labored. She said I was lucky she was letting me keep Amara at all, that women like me didn't deserve children. That's monstrous. That's wealth protecting itself. Nia coughed, a deep rattling sound that went on too long. When she finally caught her breath, there was a tinge of red on her lips. "You're coughing blood. You need to see a doctor. I've seen doctors. Free clinic when I can get an appointment. They say it's pneumonia, maybe worse, but treatment costs money I don't have." Victoria made a decision. "I'm going to help you, whether you want me to or not." Quietly. No public announcements, no legal claims, just medical care and stable housing. "You can hate me for having the life that should have been yours, but don't let that pride kill you and leave Amara alone." Nia looked at her for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but a weary kind of acceptance. "Why do you even care? This makes your whole marriage a lie." "I know." Victoria's voice was steady. But Amara isn't a lie. She's a real child who deserves a chance. And maybe part of me wants to do what Richard should have done a long time ago. 3 days later, Victoria received a plain manila envelope delivered to her penthouse by courier. No return address, no note, just a single document inside. It was a DNA test result. The header read, Paternity Analysis, Richard Hale, deceased, and Amara Williams. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Victoria sat down hard on her sofa, the paper trembling in her hands. Seeing it in writing, in cold scientific certainty, was different than suspecting. This wasn't speculation or stories or old photographs. This was proof. Amara was Richard's daughter, which meant Victoria's entire life for the past 8 years had been built on a foundation of lies. The devoted husband, the tragic early death, the legacy she'd been protecting, all of it was contaminated by this hidden truth. Daniel found her there an hour later, still holding the envelope. Mrs. Hale, you have the board meeting in 20 minutes. Cancel it. I can't cancel a board meeting. There are 17 people flying in from across the country. Then tell them I'm sick. Tell them anything. I can't face them right now. Daniel crossed the room and gently took the paper from her hands, scanning it quickly. His eyes widened. Oh, she's his daughter, Daniel. The girl from the street, the one who recognized the ring. She's Richard's biological child. Where did you get this test done? I didn't. Someone sent it to me anonymously. Victoria laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. Someone knows. Someone tested them both and wanted me to know the truth. Mrs. Hale, you need to think carefully about what you do next. If this gets out, it could destroy everything. The foundation's reputation, the company's stock price, your social standing. I don't care about my social standing. Yes, you do. And you should. That standing is what gives you power, resources, the ability to actually help people. Daniel sat down beside her. If you lose everything trying to do the right thing, you'll end up helping no one. So what are you suggesting? That I pretend I never saw this? Let that girl keep living in shelter while I sleep in a penthouse that should partially be hers. I'm suggesting you be strategic. Help them quietly, the way you've already started. Get the mother proper medical care, find them housing, set up a trust fund that can't be traced back to you directly. You can change their lives without destroying your own. Victoria knew he was right, knew the practical wisdom of his words. But something in her rebelled against it. How many times had the truth been buried for the sake of convenience? How many people had been erased to protect reputations? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You have the results. Now you know. The question is, what will you do about it? Who is this? Victoria typed back. Someone who believes truth matters more than reputation. The board is meeting in 15 minutes to discuss ways to silence the mother and daughter permanently. Thought you should know. Victoria's blood ran cold. Daniel, we need to go. Now. Go where? The foundation offices. Apparently, there's a meeting I wasn't invited to. They arrived to find the conference room full. Thomas Richardson sat at the head of the table, Richard's old college roommate and the foundation's longest-serving board member. Around him sat 6 other members, all people Victoria had worked with for years, people she'd considered allies, if not friends. They went silent when she walked in. Victoria, Thomas said carefully, this is a closed executive session. Discussing what exactly? Ways to silence a sick woman and her child. The temperature in the room dropped. Thomas's expression hardened. I don't know what you're referring to. Don't you? Someone just warned me that this meeting's agenda involves neutralizing a potential threat to the foundation's reputation. Would that threat happen to be a 10-year-old girl named Amara? Victoria, sit down. We need to discuss this calmly. I am calm. What I want to know is how you even know about her. Thomas exchanged glances with the other board members. We've had security monitoring the situation since the incident on Madison Avenue. When a child approaches you making claims about family jewelry, it raises concerns. So you had them followed. A homeless woman and her sick child. We had the situation investigated, and what we found was troubling. The woman, Nia Williams, has a history of using aliases, moving frequently, making unverifiable claims about her past connections to wealthy families. That's not true, isn't it? Or has she told you a very convincing story designed to extract money from the Hale estate? Thomas leaned forward. Victoria, I know you want to believe the best in people, but you're being manipulated. This is a classic con. Sick mother, sympathetic child. Just enough truth mixed in to make it believable. I have DNA results. The room went very quiet. What kind of DNA results? Thomas's voice was carefully neutral, proving that Amara is Richard's biological daughter. Someone gasped. Victoria saw Jennifer Morrison, the Foundation's legal counsel, go pale. Thomas recovered first. Where did you get these results? Someone sent them to me, anonymously. And you believe them? Some anonymous document that conveniently proves exactly what this con artist wants you to believe. Thomas stood up. Victoria, think. Anyone can fake a DNA test. This is exactly what they want, to create enough doubt that you start throwing money at them. I want to commission our own test. Absolutely not. Jennifer spoke for the first time. That would require obtaining DNA samples from Richard's remains or verified blood relatives. The legal complications alone would be staggering. And if word got out that we were even considering paternity testing, the media would have a field day. So what are you proposing instead? Thomas and Jennifer exchanged a look. Then Thomas said quietly, we handle this discreetly. We approached the woman with a confidential settlement. Enough money to improve her situation significantly, but tied to an ironclad NDA. She agrees to never speak about this publicly, never contact you or the Foundation again, and never make any legal claims against the estate. You want to pay her off. We want to protect the Foundation's mission. Do you have any idea what this kind of scandal would do to our fundraising, our partnerships, the hundreds of legitimate children who depend on our scholarships and programs? Thomas's voice rose. Your guilt over Richard's past doesn't justify destroying all the good work we do. And if she refuses the settlement? The silence that followed was answer enough. You destroy her, Victoria said softly. You'd use lawyers and investigators and money to crush a sick woman and her child. We'd protect ourselves, Jennifer corrected, using every legal means available. Character assassination, if necessary. Questions about her mental health, her suitability as a mother, her criminal history. She doesn't have a criminal history. Everyone has something if you look hard enough. Traffic tickets that weren't paid, tax returns that don't quite add up, neighbors who remember suspicious behavior. Jennifer's voice was clinical. We don't want to do this, Victoria, but we will if we have to. Victoria stood up slowly. She looked around the table at these people she'd worked with, donated alongside, celebrated victories with. And she realized she didn't know them at all. You're all willing to destroy an innocent child to protect a reputation. We're willing to protect hundreds of children by preserving this foundation's effectiveness, Thomas said. Sometimes the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It's unfortunate that this girl exists, but acknowledging her would harm far more children than it would help. That's a convenient moral calculation. It's the truth. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you know it. Victoria walked to the door, then turned back. I need time to think about this. Take 24 hours, Thomas said. Then we need your decision. Either you're with us in handling this discreetly, or we'll have to question whether you're still fit to lead this foundation. That evening, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse. The DNA results spread on the coffee table in front of her. Daniel had offered to stay, but she'd send him home. She needed to think, and she couldn't do that with anyone watching. Her phone rang. An unknown number again. Hello. Mrs. Hale, this is Officer Chun from the 19th Precinct. There's been an incident at St. Catherine's Shelter. A woman named Nia Williams listed you as an emergency contact. Victoria's heart stopped. What kind of incident? There was a break-in. Someone searched her living space, tore through her belongings. Ms. Williams is being treated for a panic attack, but she's asking for you. Victoria was already grabbing her keys. I'm on my way. The shelter was chaos when she arrived, police officers interviewing witnesses, crime scene tape cordoning off areas. Marie, the shelter coordinator, looked furious. In 20 years of running this place, we've never had a break-in. People here have nothing worth stealing. But someone picked the lock, came in during dinner when everyone was downstairs, went straight to Nia's area and tore it apart. What were they looking for? No idea. But Nia was terrified, kept saying she knew this would happen, that they'd found her. Victoria found Nia sitting on a cot, Amara pressed against her side. The girl's eyes were red from crying, and Nia looked like she might collapse. "You came," Nia whispered. "Of course I came. What happened?" "They took it. The envelope. The only proof I had." "Proof of what?" "That Richard and I were together. Photographs, letters he wrote me, the original receipt for the ring. I kept it all these years, hidden, just in case I ever needed to prove the truth." Nia's breathing was shallow. Someone knew it was here and came looking for it. Victoria felt cold understanding wash over her. The board. They must have hired someone to retrieve any evidence before they made their move. What move? They want to buy your silence. If you refuse, they'll try to destroy you. Nia laughed bitterly. There's nothing left to destroy. We're already at the bottom. Not quite. They could take Amara, question your fitness as a mother, manufacture evidence of neglect or instability. I heard them discussing it this afternoon. Amara made a small sound of fear, and Nia pulled her closer. Let them try. I'd rather die than let them take my daughter. You might not have to die, but you need to fight back. Victoria knelt in front of them. I can help you. Publicly. Acknowledge Amara as Richard's daughter. Demand she be included in his legacy. Force the board to accept the truth. That would destroy you too. Maybe, but it would be the truth. And I'm starting to think that matters more than protecting comfortable lies. Nia studied her face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched the ring on Victoria's finger. If you do this, there's no going back. Your whole life will change. I know. And you're willing to risk that? For us? For people you barely know? Victoria thought about Richard, about the years she'd spent mourning a man who'd apparently been someone completely different than she believed. She thought about the board members, so willing to crush innocence to protect their reputations. She thought about Amara, a child who'd done nothing wrong except be born. Truth endures, Victoria said softly, repeating the words engraved inside the ring. Maybe it's time I understood what that really means. She pulled the ring off her finger and held it out to Nia. This belongs to you. It always did. Nia stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. I don't want it. It only ever brought pain. Then give it to Amara. Let her decide what it means. Let her reclaim the history that was stolen from both of you. Slowly, Nia took the ring. She held it for a moment, then pressed it into her daughter's small hand. Your father gave this to me as a promise. He broke that promise, but you can make it mean something new, something about truth and justice and not letting anyone erase you. Amara looked down at the ring in her palm, then up at Victoria. What happens now? Victoria smiled, though her heart was pounding. Now we tell the truth. All of it. And we let the world deal with the consequences. The hospital security footage was grainy, but clear enough to tell a disturbing story. A man in dark clothing, face partially obscured by a baseball cap, had entered Nia's room at 2:30 in the morning. He'd moved with purpose, rifling through the small cabinet beside her bed, checking under the mattress, even examining the lining of her worn jacket hanging on the chair. He'd been searching for something specific. Victoria watched the footage for the third time in the hospital security office, Daniel standing beside her taking notes. The break-in at the shelter had been concerning. This was terrifying. He knew exactly what he was looking for, Daniel said quietly. This wasn't random. No, Victoria agreed. Someone sent him. Someone who knows what evidence Nia might have had. The security guard, a young man named Marcus, leaned forward. We filed a police report, but honestly, nothing was actually taken from the room. Guy left when the night nurse started her rounds. We're increasing patrols, but without a clear theft, there's not much more we can do. Victoria nodded absently, her mind racing. After the shelter break-in 2 days ago, she'd insisted on moving Nia to a private room at Mount Sinai, using a false name to admit her. She'd paid cash, kept everything off the books, tried to protect them. Clearly, it hadn't been enough. Mrs. Hale, Marcus said carefully, is this woman in some kind of danger? Because if she is, hospital security might not be sufficient. You might want to consider private protection. I'll handle it, Victoria said, making a decision. Thank you for your help. Back in Nia's room, she found Amara sitting in the chair by the window, doing homework on a battered laptop that looked like it had been salvaged from a donation bin. Nia was sleeping, her breathing labored even with the oxygen support. The doctor had confirmed pneumonia complicated by untreated tuberculosis. With proper medication and rest, she'd recover, but it would take months. Without treatment, she had weeks at best. Amara looked up when Victoria entered. The lady from security said someone tried to break in here too. Yes, but you're safe now. I've arranged for someone to be outside your door at all times. Why are they doing this? We don't have anything valuable. Victoria sat down in the other chair, considering how much truth a 10-year-old could handle. They're looking for proof. Evidence that your mother and my late husband knew each other. Evidence that might support your claim to his legacy. But you already believe us. You gave us the ring back. I believe you. But there are other people, powerful people, who don't want anyone else to know the truth. They think if they can destroy all the evidence, they can make your story seem like a lie. Amara was quiet for a moment, her young face too serious. What did they take from the shelter? An envelope your mother had hidden. It contained photographs and letters, things that prove she and Richard had a relationship. So now we can't prove anything. That's what they think. But they made a mistake. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Amara the photograph she'd found in Richard's storage unit. I have this, and I'm sure there are other records, other proof they haven't thought to destroy yet. Bank records, employment files, witness statements from people who worked in the house back then. Nia stirred in the bed, her eyes opening slowly. You're still here. Where else would I be? Living your life. Protecting your reputation. Isn't that what people like you do? But there was less hostility in Nia's voice now. More exhaustion. People like me, Victoria repeated. You keep saying that. But I'm beginning to think I don't want to be people like me anymore. Nia managed a weak smile. Careful. That kind of thinking is dangerous. Speaking of dangerous, Victoria said, pulling up the security footage on her phone. We need to talk about what was in that envelope. Nia watched the video, her face going pale. They're not giving up. No. Which means whatever you had must have been more than just sentimental evidence. What exactly did they take? Nia glanced at Amara, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, she said, the ring receipt wasn't just a receipt. On the back, Richard had written a note. A promise that he'd find a way to make our relationship work, no matter what his family said. It was dated 3 months before he proposed to you. Victoria absorbed this. So, it would prove he was in a serious relationship with you while courting me. More than that, it would prove he lied to you from the beginning, that your entire marriage was built on deception. Nia coughed, wincing. But there was something else in that envelope, too. Something I never told you about. What? A photograph. Not of Richard and me. Of my father. Victoria Froneth. Your father? What does he have to do with this? Everything. Nia's voice was barely above a whisper. My father was Marcus Wellington. He was one of the original investors in Hale Industries, back when it was just starting out in the 1920s. He and Richard's grandfather were business partners. The room seemed to tilt. Victoria gripped the arms of her chair. That's not possible. Hale Industries was founded by Richard's grandfather alone. It's in every company history, every biography. That's the story they tell now. But it's not the truth. Nia struggled to sit up more, and Amara immediately moved to help her, adjusting the pillows. My father put up half the initial capital. He had patents for manufacturing processes that made the whole business viable. But he was black, and this was the 1920s. Having a black partner wasn't considered acceptable for a company that wanted to work with certain clients. So they erased him. Worse than that, Richard's grandfather bought him out for a fraction of what his stake was worth. Told him it was that, or be forced out entirely, lose everything. My father took the money because he had a family to support, but he never got over the betrayal. He died when I was 12, bitter and broken. Victoria felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. And the ring was my grandmother's, a gift from my grandfather to prove he'd made something of himself despite everything. When he died, my mother sold most of the jewelry to pay bills, but she kept that ring Gave it to me when I turned 18, said it was a reminder that we came from something, even if the world tried to forget it. And you gave it to Richard. Showed it to him when we were together. Told him the story. He was fascinated by it. Said it was proof that his family's fortune had complicated origins. Nia's laugh was bitter. He promised to help me research my father's real contribution, maybe even get some kind of official acknowledgement. Instead, his mother took the ring and gave it back to him as a Hale family heirloom to give to his proper bride. Amara spoke up, her voice small. So that ring belongs to us twice over? Because it was great-grandmother's, and because Amara's father gave it to you. Yes, baby. That's why I reacted so strongly when you said you'd seen that woman wearing it. It wasn't just about Richard. It was about our whole family history being stolen and worn by someone else. Victoria felt sick. She'd been wearing a ring that represented not one, but two erasures, two acts of theft. The photograph you had, did it show your father and Richard's grandfather together? Yes, at the factory opening in 1922. Both their names are visible on the banner behind them, listed as co-founders. It's the only proof I know of that my father was ever involved. Everything else has been scrubbed from the official records. And now someone has it. Now someone has destroyed it. Most likely. Can't have inconvenient truths floating around when you're trying to protect a legacy built on lies. Daniel, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. Not necessarily destroyed. If they were smart, they'd keep it as leverage. Proof they could release if you ever try to make trouble. Either way, we can't prove anything now, Nia said. Actually, Victoria said slowly, we might be able to. Daniel, do you still have that contact at the Historical Society? The one who helped with the Foundation's anniversary exhibit. Dr. Patricia Hayes. What? Because if Hale Industries had a black co-founder in the 20s, there might be records. Business filings, newspaper announcements, patent applications. Things that can't be erased completely no matter how hard someone tries. That would take time to research. Weeks, maybe months. Then we start now. Victoria stood up. I want everything you can find on Marcus Wellington and his connection to Hale Industries. Employment records, financial documents, anything that proves he existed and was involved. Mrs. Hale, Daniel said carefully, the board gave you 24 hours to decide whether to support their settlement plan. That deadline passed yesterday. If you start actively investigating the company's history, they'll see it as a declaration of war. Good, because that's exactly what it is. Over the next week, Victoria threw herself into research with an intensity that surprised even Daniel. She hired 3 different private investigators, tasked each with different aspects of the investigation, and told them to report directly to her, not through any company channels. The first investigator, a retired FBI agent named Sarah Blackwood, focused on financial records. She discovered that in 1923, there had been a substantial payment from Hale Industries to a Marcus Wellington, categorized as a partnership dissolution settlement. The second investigator, a genealogist named Robert Kim, traced the Wellington family history and found that Marcus Wellington had indeed filed patent applications for industrial machinery in 1921 and 1922, some of which were later registered under Hale Industries' name. The third investigator, a journalist named Maria Santos who specialized in corporate histories, found newspaper archives mentioning Wellington as a silent partner in the early years of the company, though references to him disappeared entirely after 1924. Meanwhile, Nia's health slowly improved with proper treatment. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, though they warned it would be a long process. Amara continued attending school. Now from a small apartment Victoria had quietly rented for them in a safe neighborhood, still using false names for protection. The board's patience was running out. Thomas Richardson called Victoria to his office for what he termed a final conversation. "You've been avoiding us," he said without preamble when she arrived. "You've moved the woman and child without informing anyone. You've been asking questions about company history that have nothing to do with Foundation business. What exactly are you doing, Victoria?" "Research." "Into what?" "The truth about how Hale Industries was really founded." Thomas's expression hardened. "I see. And what truth do you think you've discovered?" "That Richard's grandfather had a black business partner named Marcus Wellington." that this partner was systematically erased from company history and cheated out of his rightful stake, and that his granddaughter is Amara's mother, which means Amara has a claim to the Hale legacy through multiple lines. That's an interesting story. Do you have proof? I'm gathering it. Let me save you some time. Whatever proof you think you're finding won't matter. The company has been operating under its current structure for a century. Any claims based on century-old partnerships would be legally meaningless. Statute of limitations, settled accounts, documented transfers of ownership. Our lawyers have already reviewed the possibilities. You knew, Victoria said softly. You've known all along about Marcus Wellington. Of course we knew. The senior board members have always known. It's part of the company's institutional history, handled and resolved generations ago. What we didn't expect was for some descendant to show up 100 years later trying to rewrite history. So you're admitting the erasure happened. I'm admitting that business practices in the 1920s were different than they are now. Marcus Wellington was compensated fairly for his time and contributions. The fact that he chose to take a buyout rather than continue as a partner was his decision. He was forced out because of his race. That's speculation. And even if it were true, it's ancient history. You can't undo a century of legitimate business operations because of grievances from the Jim Crow era. Victoria stood up. Watch me try. Sit down, Victoria. We're not finished. Thomas's voice carried steel now. You need to understand what you're risking here. If you pursue this crusade, you won't just lose your position with the Foundation. We'll fight you on every front. Character witnesses questioning your mental stability after Richard's death, suggesting this obsession with the girl is some kind of grief-induced delusion. We'll audit every Foundation expense you've ever approved, looking for irregularities. We'll make your life so legally complicated that you'll spend years and millions in legal fees defending yourself. And I'll make sure everyone knows why you're doing it. I'll make sure the world knows that Hale Industries was built on stolen black intellectual property and that you're still trying to cover it up a century later. You think the media will care about something that happened in the 1920s? This isn't the scandal you think it is. Maybe not by itself, but combined with the story of Richard's illegitimate black daughter living in a shelter while the company spends millions on luxury retreats. The daughter who's descended from the erased co-founder? That's the kind of story that goes viral, Thomas. That's the kind of story that destroys corporate reputations in the age of social media. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You're willing to burn it all down. Everything Richard built, everything you've worked for. Richard didn't build anything. He inherited something built partially on theft. And yes, I'm willing to burn down a legacy based on lies if that's what it takes to tell the truth. Then you leave us no choice. Thomas picked up his phone. Jennifer, please come in. Jennifer Morrison entered carrying a thick folder. She set it on the desk without looking at Victoria. These are defamation papers, Thomas said, ready to be filed against Nia Williams the moment she makes any public claims about Richard or the company. We're also prepared to file for emergency custody of the child, citing her mother's unstable housing situation and history of mental health issues. She doesn't have mental health issues. She will by the time our expert witnesses are done evaluating her. Depression, anxiety, possible delusional disorder. All consistent with someone living in poverty and making grandiose claims about connections to wealthy families. Thomas pushed the folder toward Victoria. This is what happens if you don't accept our settlement offer. The mother gets destroyed in court. The child ends up in foster care during the lengthy custody battle, and you get sued personally for tortious interference with company business. Victoria looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. You'd really take a child from her mother just to protect your reputation? We do what's necessary to protect a 100-year-old institution that employs thousands of people and generates millions in charitable giving. One child's temporary discomfort is unfortunate, but sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. The greater good, Victoria repeated. Is that what you call it? She walked out of the office without another word, leaving the folder on the desk. In the elevator, her hands were shaking. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel. I need you to set up a meeting with Dr. Hayes at the Historical Society. Tomorrow if possible. And contact that lawyer you mentioned the one who specializes in corporate accountability cases. You're really doing this? I'm really doing this. They want to threaten Amara's custody? They want to paint Nia as delusional? Then I'm going to make sure every bit of their dirty history gets exposed. The next afternoon, Victoria sat in Dr. Patricia Hayes's cluttered office at the New York Historical Society. The elderly academic listened carefully as Victoria explained what she was looking for, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Marcus Wellington, Dr. Hayes said when Victoria finished. I've actually come across that name before in my research on early 20th century black entrepreneurs. He was quite remarkable, from what I understand. Self-taught engineer, brilliant mind for industrial processes. Do you have any documentation about his connection to Hale Industries? Not in my personal files, but I know where to look. The challenge with early black business history is that so much of it was deliberately obscured or destroyed. But there are always traces left behind, if you know where to look. Dr. Hayes stood up, moving to one of her overflowing bookshelves. Business registrations, patent filings, census records, newspaper archives. People forget that local black newspapers covered these stories even when white papers ignored them. She pulled down several volumes, blowing dust off the covers. Give me a week. I'll compile everything I can find. But I should warn you, even with documentation, proving a legal claim after all this time will be extremely difficult. I don't need a legal claim, Victoria said. I need the truth on record. I need proof that can't be denied or dismissed. You want the moral high ground, not the legal one. I want both, but I'll settle for people knowing what really happened. Dr. Hayes smiled. Then I think we can help you. History has a way of surviving, even when people try to bury it. Truth endures, as they say. Victoria felt a chill at the familiar words. Where does that phrase come from? It's old. Classical roots, I believe. It was popular among certain progressive movements in the early 20th century, particularly among people fighting for civil rights and social justice. A reminder that lies might prevail temporarily, but eventually the truth comes out. Dr. Hayes tilted her head. Why do you ask? Those words are engraved inside a ring that belonged to Marcus Wellington's family and ended up with mine. How poetic and how appropriate. Dr. Hayes returned to her desk, her expression thoughtful. You know, there's a man I think you should speak with. Retired lawyer, must be 90 years old now, named Lawrence Freeman. He handled a lot of estate settlements back in the day, including some that involved the Hale family. Lives in a nursing home in Queens. Not sure how sharp his memory still is, but it might be worth a conversation. Victoria wrote down the information. Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Thank you for caring about this. Too many people are content to let uncomfortable histories stay buried. 2 days later, Victoria sat in the common room of Sunnyside Care Facility, waiting for Lawrence Freeman to be brought down from his room. Daniel had wanted to come with her, but she'd insisted on doing this alone. Something about the whole situation felt deeply personal now, beyond just corporate history or family scandal. Lawrence Freeman arrived in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, but his eyes were sharp and alert behind thick glasses. He studied Victoria carefully as she introduced herself. Hale, he said, his voice rough with age. I knew Richard Hale Sr. Handled some business for him in the 50s and 60s. You related? I was married to his grandson, Richard Hale III. The one who died young. Tragic. Freeman dismissed the nurse with a wave. What brings you here, Mrs. Hale? I'm retired 30 years. If you need legal help, I can recommend someone more current. I need historical help. Information about a case you might have handled. A partnership dissolution between the Hale family and a man named Marcus Wellington. Freeman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. That's going back a long time. 1923, according to the records I've found. Before my time. I wasn't even born yet. But he was watching her too carefully now, his body language defensive. But you knew about it. You handled follow-up matters, didn't you? Estate issues. Maybe in the 60s when Marcus Wellington died. Freeman was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound full of old regrets. I was young then, just starting out. The senior partners gave me what they called a simple estate matter. Make sure certain documents were properly filed Certain records were properly sealed. I didn't ask questions. That wasn't what young lawyers did back then, especially young black lawyers trying to make it in white firms. Victoria leaned forward. You were asked to seal documents about the Wellington partnership. I was asked to ensure that certain historical claims remained historical, that no one could come forward later saying they had a stake in the company based on old arrangements. Freeman rubbed his face tiredly. They told me it was all properly settled decades earlier, that we were just tidying up loose ends. I believed them because I wanted to, because the alternative was admitting I was being used to help bury a black man's legacy. What documents did you seal? Partnership agreements, profit-sharing arrangements, correspondence between Wellington and the original Hale showing the true nature of their relationship. Everything that proved Wellington was more than just an employee or minor investor. Everything that showed he was a full partner who got forced out. And you still have copies? No. The originals went into sealed company archives. I was supposed to destroy my working copies. Freeman smiled slightly. But I was young and idealistic despite everything. I kept them. Told myself someday the truth might matter. Someday someone might care enough to ask the right questions. Victoria's heart was racing. Do you still have them? In a safe deposit box at Chase Bank on Queens Boulevard. I've been paying the annual fee for 60 years, waiting. He reached into his pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out a small key. I'm 93 years old, Mrs. Hale. I don't have much time left. If you're asking these questions, if you're willing to fight for the truth, then maybe it's finally time for those documents to see daylight. Victoria took the key, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Why didn't you ever come forward yourself? Because I was afraid. Because I had a career to protect, a family to support. Because the Hale family had power and resources I couldn't match. Freeman's eyes were wet now. I told myself I was being practical. But the truth is, I was a coward. I let an innocent man's legacy stay buried because it was easier than fighting. You kept the documents. That took courage. It took guilt. There's a difference. Freeman gripped the arms of his wheelchair. Marcus Wellington's granddaughter. Is she still alive? Yes. And she has a daughter. Your kept documents might be the only way to protect them both. Then use them well. Make my cowardice mean something. Freeman's voice was fierce now despite his age. And when you expose the truth, make sure people know that there were others like me, people who knew and stayed silent. Don't let us off easy just because we kept a few papers. Victoria left the nursing home with the key clutched in her hand and tears on her face. She called Daniel from the car. I found them. The original partnership documents. Everything we need to prove Marcus Wellington was a full co-founder. That's amazing. Where are they? Safe deposit box. I'm going to retrieve them tomorrow, make copies, and then I'm going to the media. All of it. The stolen partnership, Richard's daughter, the board's attempts to cover it up. Everything. Mrs. Hale, are you sure? Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. Set up meetings with the Times, the Washington Post, maybe that investigative reporter from ProPublica who did the piece on corporate accountability. I want this everywhere. What about Nia and Amara? Are they ready for this level of exposure? Victoria paused. She hadn't actually asked them. She'd been so focused on justice, on truth, on revenge against the board that she hadn't stopped to consider whether Nia and Amara wanted to be at the center of a national scandal. I'll talk to them tonight, she said. But Daniel, this needs to happen. Too many people have stayed silent for too long. Lawrence Freeman is 93 and still carrying guilt about not speaking up 60 years ago. I won't spend the rest of my life like that. That evening, Victoria sat in Nia's small apartment, watching Amara do homework at the kitchen table while Nia prepared tea with careful movements, still weak from her illness. I found proof, Victoria said without preamble. Documents that prove your father was a full partner in Hale Industries. That show exactly how he was forced out and exactly what he was owed. Documents that can't be dismissed or explained away. Nia's hand trembled, nearly dropping the teacup. Ow! A lawyer kept copies when he was supposed to destroy them. He gave them to me yesterday. With these, we can go public. We can force the company to acknowledge what happened, both to your father and to you. We can make sure Amara gets the recognition and support she deserves. Go public, Nia repeated softly, You mean tell everyone? The media? The whole world? Yes. It's the only way to protect you from the board's threats. If everything is public, they can't hurt you quietly. They can't take Amara or destroy your reputation without everyone knowing why they're doing it. Amara looked up from her homework. Would I have to talk to reporters? Probably, at some point. But I'd make sure you were protected, that you had support, that no one could hurt you. No one except everyone at school finding out that I'm the poor black kid claiming to be related to rich white people. Amara said with surprising bitterness. No one except everyone looking at me different, treating me like I'm either lying or looking for money. Victoria hadn't thought about that. She'd been so focused on justice and truth that she hadn't considered what it would be like for a 10-year-old to suddenly become the center of a national controversy about race and wealth and family secrets. Nia sat down heavily. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Why I stayed hidden for so long. Once this story gets out, we can never just be people again. We'll always be the ones involved in that scandal. The black woman who slept with a rich white man. The illegitimate daughter claiming inheritance. It doesn't matter what the truth is, people will make it ugly. But you'll also be the ones who exposed a century of injustice. Who forced a powerful corporation to acknowledge its racist history. Who refused to stay silent. Victoria leaned forward. I know it's terrifying, but staying hidden hasn't protected you. They found you anyway. They broke into the shelter, into your hospital room. They're threatening to take Amara. Silence didn't keep you safe. Neither will publicity, Nia said. It'll just be a different kind of danger. Death threats from racists, harassment from people who think we're con artists, endless media attention, lawyers picking apart every detail of our lives. I can protect you from that. Can you? Or are you making promises you can't keep because you want to feel like you're doing the right thing? Nia's voice was gentle but firm. Victoria, I appreciate everything you've done. The medical care, the apartment, the investigation. But you need to understand something. This isn't your redemption story. This is our lives. Mine and Amara's. And we're the ones who will have to live with whatever decision gets made. The words hit Victoria like a slap. Because Nia was right. Somewhere in all of this, Victoria had started thinking of the situation as her chance to atone for Richard's sins, to prove she was better than the board, to be the hero. She hadn't fully considered that Nia and Amara might not want to be saved in this particular way. You're right, Victoria said quietly. I'm sorry. This has to be your choice. Nia and Amara looked at each other. One of those wordless parent-child communications that spoke volumes. Finally, Amara said, I want people to know about great-great-grandfather Wellington. I want his name to be in the history books again. Baby, that's not enough reason to risk everything. Isn't it? You always told me we came from something. That we had dignity and history. But nobody knows that except us. Great-great-grandfather got erased. His work, his name, everything. If we stay quiet, he stays erased. And maybe someday I have kids and they get erased too. When does it stop? Nia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. When it stops putting you in danger. I'm already in danger, Mama. We're living in a shelter. You're sick. Bad people are breaking and looking for stuff. How is that safe? Amara's voice was steady beyond her years. At least if we tell the truth, people will know why they're trying to hurt us. Victoria watched this exchange, feeling both moved and humbled. This child had more courage than most adults she knew. Nia wiped her eyes and looked at Victoria. If we do this, I need promises. Real ones, in writing, that you'll support us through whatever comes. Legal protection, financial security, help dealing with media, therapy if we need it. I won't let my daughter go through this alone. You have my word. And yes, in writing, whatever you need. Then I guess we tell the truth. Nia smiled slightly. Truth endures, right? Maybe it's time to find out if that's really true. The boardroom of Hale Industries had never felt so much like a battlefield. Victoria sat at one end of the long mahogany table, Daniel beside her with a laptop and stacks of documents. At the other end, Thomas Richardson presided over the emergency shareholder meeting, flanked by Jennifer Morrison and 4 other board members who'd been loyal to the old guard for decades. Between them sat representatives from 3 major news outlets, invited by Victoria against every protocol the company had ever established. The presence of reporters had caused an uproar, with Thomas demanding they leave and Victoria calmly refusing to proceed without them. This meeting was called to address malicious rumors being spread about company history. Thomas began, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Rumors that threatened to damage our reputation and undermine shareholder confidence. These aren't rumors, Victoria said clearly. They're documented facts, and the shareholders deserve to know the truth about how this company was really founded. She nodded to Daniel, who opened his laptop and pulled up the first scanned document on the projection screen. It was a business registration from 1922, listing both Jonathan Hale and Marcus Wellington as equal partners in what would become Hale Industries. The room went silent. "Where did you get that?" Jennifer demanded. "From public records that no one bothered to look for, because the company spent a century pretending they didn't exist." Victoria stood up, moving to stand beside the screen. Marcus Wellington was a brilliant engineer who co-founded this company with Richard's great-grandfather. He contributed half the initial capital and held patents essential to the business model. For 2 years, they were equal partners. Daniel clicked to the next image. A patent application showing Wellington's name alongside detailed mechanical drawings. Then something changed. In 1923, Wellington was bought out for a fraction of what his stake was worth. The official story was that he chose to leave. The truth, documented in correspondence we've recovered, is that he was forced out because having a black partner was considered bad for business with certain clients. Thomas was on his feet now. This is ancient history. Whatever happened nearly a century ago has no bearing on the company's current operations, doesn't it? Victoria's voice was calm, but carried across the room. Because the wealth this company accumulated, the reputation it built, the opportunities it created, all of that was built on stolen intellectual property and racist exclusion. And when Marcus Wellington's granddaughter tried to bring this to light, when she simply wanted acknowledgement of her family's contribution, this board attempted to silence her through intimidation and legal threats. "That's a gross mischaracterization," Jennifer interjected. "We offered a generous settlement to avoid unnecessary litigation." "You threatened to take her child away," Victoria said flatly. "You hired investigators to break into her shelter and hospital room. You prepared defamation suits and paid expert witnesses to question her mental health, all to protect a lie that's been festering for 100 years. One of the reporters, a woman from the Washington Post named Christine Young, raised her hand. "Can you prove these allegations about the board's actions?" Victoria nodded to Daniel again. Up came copies of the legal documents Thomas had shown her, the ones threatening custody battles and defamation suits. Daniel had photographed them during their meeting, a small act of betrayal against the board that Victoria had approved. These documents were prepared by the board's legal counsel, ready to be filed the moment Nia Williams made any public claims. The goal was to destroy her credibility and separate her from her daughter before the truth could come out. Thomas was pale now, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Those are privileged legal documents. How dare you share them with the press? How dare you use them to terrorize a sick woman and her child?" Victoria shot back. Another reporter spoke up, a young man from ProPublica. "What about the ring? We've heard there's a personal connection between Mrs. Williams and the Hale family beyond this historical business dispute." Victoria had known this question would come. She and Nia had discussed how much personal detail to reveal, how much of Richard's betrayal to make public. They decided on transparency, painful as it would be. Nia Williams worked as a caretaker in the Hale household 10 years ago. She and my late husband, Richard, developed a relationship. When his family discovered it, he was pressured to end things. Nia was pregnant at the time, but never told Richard. She disappeared, changed her name, and raised her daughter alone in poverty while the Hale family continued to accumulate wealth. The room erupted. Reporters typing frantically, board members shouting objections, shareholders looking stunned. "Do you have proof of paternity?" Christine Young asked. Victoria pulled an envelope from her briefcase. DNA results showing 99.97% probability that Richard Hale was Amara Williams's biological father. Results that were anonymously sent to me, suggesting someone else already knew this truth and chose to use it for leverage rather than justice. She looked directly at Thomas as she said it, watching his face carefully. He didn't deny it. He didn't need to. The guilt was written clearly in his expression. "You ordered the DNA test," Victoria said. Not a question, but a statement. "You found out Richard had a daughter, and instead of doing the right thing, you calculated how to use that information to maintain control." "I was protecting the company," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "You were protecting your power. There's a difference." Daniel pulled up the final set of documents, the ones from Lawrence Freeman's safe deposit box. Partnership agreements showing profit-sharing arrangements, correspondence showing the deliberate exclusion of Wellington from company history, financial records proving he'd been paid less than 10% of what his stake was worth. These documents were kept hidden for 60 years by a lawyer who regretted his role in burying the truth, Victoria said. "Lawrence Freeman is 93 years old now, and he gave them to me because he didn't want to die knowing he'd helped erase an innocent man's legacy." That's the real story of Hale Industries. Not innovation and entrepreneurship, but theft and historical erasure maintained through generations of silence. The reporters were asking questions now, rapid fire, overlapping. How much was the Wellington stake worth today? Would there be legal action to recover assets? What did this mean for the company's future? How did the foundation fit into all of this? Victoria held up a hand for quiet. "I'm not here to destroy Hale Industries. Despite everything, the company employs thousands of people and does meaningful charitable work. What I'm here to do is force an acknowledgement of truth. Marcus Wellington was a co-founder. His contributions made this company possible, and his descendants deserve recognition and appropriate restitution." "What kind of restitution?" one shareholder asked nervously. "That's going to be decided through negotiation, not litigation if possible. But at minimum, Marcus Wellington's name will be restored to all official company histories. A substantial fund will be established in his honor to support Black entrepreneurs and engineers. And Amara Williams will receive the support and opportunities she would have had if her father had done the right thing from the beginning." Thomas was shaking his head. "You can't just rewrite a century of company history because of some guilt you feel about your husband's personal failings." "I'm not rewriting history. I'm correcting it. There's a difference." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, descending into arguments about legal liability, financial exposure, and reputational damage. Several board members sided with Victoria, shocked by the revelations and uncomfortable with the tactics Thomas had approved. Others remained loyal to the old guard, insisting that protecting the company's image was more important than historical accuracy. Finally, Victoria stood up. "I'm calling for a vote. Either this board agrees to formally acknowledge Marcus Wellington's role as co-founder and begins good faith negotiations with his descendants, or I'm resigning from the foundation and taking this fight public in every way possible. You have 24 hours to decide." She walked out without waiting for a response, the reporters following her with shouted questions. Daniel gathered their materials and hurried after her. Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered. Somehow word had leaked about the meeting, and protesters had materialized with signs. Some supported Victoria and Amara, demanding corporate accountability and racial justice. Others accused them of trying to steal from a company they'd never worked for, of rewriting history for profit. And there, standing slightly apart from both groups, were Nia and Amara. Victoria hadn't expected them to come. They'd agreed it might be safer to wait at the apartment, to let Victoria handle the board confrontation alone. But here they were, Amara holding her mother's hand, both of them watching Victoria with expressions that mixed hope and fear. Victoria walked over to them, ignoring the reporters' cameras and questions. "How did it go?" Nia asked quietly. "I told them everything. Showed them everything. Now we wait to see if they choose truth or continued denial. And if they choose denial, then we fight. But at least the world will know what we're fighting for." Amara looked up at the Hale Industries building, its glass and steel facade reflecting the afternoon sun. "My great-great-grandfather helped build that." "Yes, he did. Do you think they'll put his name on it? Victoria knelt down to Amara's level. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you this. Whether they acknowledge him or not, whether they do the right thing or not, you will know the truth about where you came from. You will know that you're descended from someone brilliant and brave, someone who helped create something meaningful even though he was treated terribly. That truth is yours now, and no one can take it away. The next 3 weeks were a blur of media attention, legal negotiations, and public scrutiny. The story exploded across news outlets and social media. Some celebrated Victoria's courage in exposing corporate racism and family secrets. Others accused her of betraying her late husband's memory and destroying a company's reputation for personal redemption. The think pieces came next. Articles about race and wealth in America, about how many fortunes were built on erased black contributions, about the responsibility of descendants to acknowledge their ancestors' injustices. Scholars weighed in on the historical significance. Lawyers debated the legal implications, and social media users argued endlessly about whether Amara deserved any financial compensation for something that happened a century ago. Through it all, Victoria worked behind the scenes. She hired a PR firm to manage media requests for Nia and Amara, ensuring they weren't overwhelmed. She brought in lawyers specializing in restorative justice to negotiate with the company. And she set up a trust fund for Amara's education and future, independent of whatever the board ultimately decided. The board's decision came on a Tuesday morning. Thomas Richardson had been forced to resign under pressure from younger shareholders who saw the PR nightmare continuing to unfold. In his place, the board elected Sandra Hayes, the daughter of one of the company's first black executives, someone who understood the importance of historical accountability. Sandra called Victoria personally to deliver the news. The board has voted to officially recognize Marcus Wellington as co-founder of Hale Industries. His name will be added to all company literature, and we're commissioning a permanent installation in the headquarters lobby documenting his contributions. Additionally, we're establishing the Marcus Wellington Innovation Fund with an initial endowment of $50 million to support black entrepreneurs in engineering and technology. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling something loosen in her chest. And Amara? We're setting up a separate trust in the amount of $10 million for her education and future needs. It's not restitution for what was stolen from her great-great-grandfather. We couldn't possibly calculate that fairly. But it's an acknowledgement that she deserves opportunities she was denied because of her father's choices and this company's historical practices. She'll need to be included in company history too. As Richard's daughter, Sandra was quiet for a moment. That's more complicated. It involves acknowledging the personal failings of a deceased family member. But yes, we're prepared to do that as well, with appropriate sensitivity to everyone involved. After the call ended, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, looking out at the city. She thought about Richard, about the man she'd thought she married versus the man he'd actually been. She thought about all the years she'd spent living a carefully constructed life, never questioning the foundation it was built on. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nia. Did you hear? Yes, it's done. Thank you. For everything. For believing us. For fighting when you didn't have to. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment before responding. I didn't have to. Just took me a while to realize it. 3 months later, Victoria stood in the lobby of Hale Industries watching the unveiling ceremony for the Marcus Wellington Memorial installation. It was a beautiful piece, mixing historical photographs with modern design, telling the story of Wellington's contributions and the injustice of his erasure in clear, unflinching language. Nia and Amara stood beside her, both dressed in new clothes that Nia had insisted on buying with her own money from the part-time job she'd found once her health recovered. Nia had refused to touch the settlement money yet, saying she needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own first. Amara wore the ring on a chain around her neck. It was too big for her fingers, but she'd wanted it close. The emerald-cut diamond caught the lobby lights, throwing green fire across her dark skin. Sandra Hayes gave a speech about corporate responsibility and historical truth. Dr. Patricia Hayes from the Historical Society spoke about the importance of preserving uncomfortable histories. And then, To Victoria's surprise, Amara was invited to speak. The girl walked to the microphone with her mother's hand in hers, then stepped up to the platform alone. She was small for her age, and the microphone had to be adjusted down. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. I never met my great-great-grandfather Marcus Wellington. He died a long time before I was born, but I know about him now because of the people who kept his story alive. My great-grandmother who saved the ring. My grandmother who passed down the memories. My mother who never forgot where we came from, even when we had nothing. She paused, looking around at the assembled crowd of employees, journalists, and guests. People ask me if I'm angry about what happened to him, about how he was treated, how his name got erased, how my family lost everything. And yeah, sometimes I am. But mostly I'm just glad that now everyone knows the truth. That when people walk through this lobby, they'll see his name and know he was here. That he mattered. That he built something important even though people tried to pretend he didn't. Amara touched the ring hanging around her neck. This ring has words inside it that say truth endures. For a long time, I didn't really understand what that meant. But now I think it means that even when people try to bury the truth, even when it takes 100 years, eventually it finds a way to come out. Truth doesn't give up. It just waits for the right people to be brave enough to tell it. She looked directly at Victoria as she said it, and Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. So, thank you to everyone who was brave enough to tell the truth. And thank you to my great-great-grandfather for being someone worth remembering. The applause was thunderous. Victoria watched Amara step down from the platform and return to her mother's embrace, both of them crying and smiling at the same time. After the ceremony, people mingled around the installation, taking photographs and reading the detailed history panels. Victoria found herself standing beside Daniel, both of them watching the crowd. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Lighter," Victoria said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally got to put it down." "Any regrets?" She thought about it honestly. About the truth coming out? No. About how much pain this caused people I care about? Yes. About my marriage being revealed as a lie? I don't know. Maybe Richard and I could have been happy if he'd been honest from the beginning. Or maybe we were always built on a foundation too broken to last. What will you do now? Run the foundation, but differently, with more transparency, more focus on restorative justice, more willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. She smiled, and probably take some time off. "I'm tired, Daniel. This whole thing has been exhausting. You've earned a rest." Nia approached them, Amara wandering off to look more closely at the installation panels. "There's something I want to give you," Nia said, pulling a small box from her purse. Victoria opened it to find a simple silver chain with a small charm, a tiny engraved medallion. She turned it over and saw the words, "Truth endures." "I can't wear the ring," Nia said. "Too many painful memories attached to it. And Amara should have it. It's part of her inheritance. But I wanted you to have something too. A reminder that what you did mattered. That speaking truth when it's hard is worth doing." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me be part of this. Thank you for seeing us, for believing that a homeless kid on the street might be telling the truth instead of assuming the worst." Nia's voice was soft. "You didn't have to do any of this. You could have walked away, protected your comfortable life, let us disappear back into invisibility. But you didn't. Neither did you. You could have taken the settlement and stayed silent." "We're stubborn," Nia said with a slight smile. "Apparently it runs in the family. Wellington's stubbornness." They stood together watching Amara, who was now explaining something about her great-great-grandfather to a reporter, her face animated and proud. "She's going to do amazing things," Victoria said. "Yes, she is. And not because of money or connections, though those will help, but because she knows who she is now, where she comes from, what she's worth." Nia touched Victoria's arm lightly. "That's the real gift you gave us. Not the settlement or the acknowledgement, but the ability to hold our heads up and claim our own history." 6 months later, Victoria stood on the same street corner where she'd first encountered Amara. It was a beautiful spring afternoon, the kind that made New York feel full of possibility. She'd been shopping again, though this time at a small bookstore rather than Bergdorf Goodman, picking up copies of a new children's book about Marcus Wellington that had just been published. She saw Nia and Amara before they saw her. They were walking together, Amara in her school uniform from the private academy she now attended on scholarship, Nia looking healthy and strong in scrubs from her job at a community health center. They were laughing about something, relaxed in a way Victoria had never seen them before. When Amara spotted Victoria, her face lit up. She ran over, her backpack bouncing. "Mrs. Hale, did you hear? I got out my history project about great-great-grandfather." "That's wonderful. I'd love to see it sometime. I'll email it to you." I included the stuff about the ring and everything. My teacher said it was the best family history presentation she'd ever seen. Nia caught up, slightly out of breath. She's been talking about nothing else for days. You'd think she discovered him herself, rather than just researched him. In a way, she did discover him, Victoria said, by refusing to let him stay invisible. They walked together to a nearby cafe, falling into the easy rhythm of friendship that had developed over the months. They talked about Amara's school, about Nia's growing role at the health center, about the foundation's new initiatives. At one point, Amara pulled the ring out from under her shirt, where she still wore it on the chain. "I've been thinking about what to do with this when I'm older." "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked. "Maybe give it to my own daughter someday, if I have one, and tell her the whole story. About great-great-grandfather and the company he built. About my dad who made mistakes, but also made me. About my mom who was brave enough to survive. And about you, who helped us tell the truth." Victoria felt emotion well up in her chest. "That sounds perfect." "And maybe," Amara continued, "the ring won't just be about what was taken from us anymore. It'll be about what we got back. About how truth really does endure if you're patient enough and brave enough." As they sat in the cafe, sun streaming through the windows, Victoria realized something. This journey hadn't been about redemption or fixing the past. It had been about creating space for truth to exist, about allowing multiple stories to be told instead of just the comfortable ones. Richard's legacy was complicated now. Not the perfect tragic figure she'd mourned, but a real flawed person who'd made choices with lasting consequences. The company's history was complicated too, not a simple narrative of innovation, but a story that included exploitation and erasure alongside achievement. And that was okay. Truth was supposed to be complicated. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Foundation's new director of restorative justice programs. They'd identified 3 other historically erased contributors to various companies the Foundation worked with, and they wanted Victoria's guidance on how to approach acknowledgement. The work wasn't over. It would probably never be over. There would always be more buried truths, more uncomfortable histories, more people who deserved recognition and justice. But sitting there with Nia and Amara, watching this child who'd started as a stranger on a street corner and become something like family, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that everything would be fixed or made right, but hope that truth still mattered, that people could change, that the future didn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Truth endures, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it sets you free. As they left the cafe and walked back into the spring sunshine, Amara took Victoria's hand on one side and her mother's on the other. 3 women connected by tragedy and truth, by secrets revealed and histories reclaimed. Above them, the Hale Industries building stood gleaming in the distance, its lobby now containing the name Marcus Wellington alongside the Hale family members. Not erased anymore, not forgotten, just truth, finally given the space to exist. And that, Victoria thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. When faced with a truth that could cost you everything you've built, would you have the courage to speak it, or would you choose the safety of silence? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales about courage, justice, and the power of truth.